So now Grant Miller, I shouldn't say CEO, it should say product manager. Because I've been kind of, if you've worked with me recently, if you've seen me in some of the threads, I've been the active PM on what we call our vendor portal team. And so this is the team that kind of manages the vendor portal, like vendor.replicator.com, things like Air Gap Builder, things like the download portal, the SDK, all kind of fall into our purview. And one of the big investments that we have made is to really solve the problem around distributing Helm applications into air gap environments. And so that means not packaging up Helm inside of an embedded cluster, inside of COTS or curl, but actually the end customer wants to run Helm, and how do we deliver it to them? And then, and part of the answer is the download portal. But first, let's just talk about why Helm and why air gap. So you're probably all familiar, but Helm has become the most popular package manager, and many enterprises expect that their third-party commercial software vendors provide them with a Helm chart. And what we also see is that air gap is really much more than just air gap. And Chuck will get into this in his talk next. I think really pairs well with what I'll be kind of giving an overview to. Chuck is going to do a lot more deep dives into the demos in the next talk. But with regards to how enterprises think about Helm charts, they often have existing pipelines. That's kind of what I've drawn out here, right? This is a pipeline that someone might be using to deploy Helm charts into, through Argo with their CI into, dev, test, and production Kubernetes environments. And so if your end customers already have, these kind of pipelines and they expect Helm charts, then providing them with the Helm chart is actually what they want. And it's the best way to actually satisfy their needs because they have the experience and the tooling to make that work. Additionally, when it comes to air gap, many of these pipelines require that images deployed to their clusters are only pulled from private image registries, which means they don't want to pull from their cluster directly, to an open source repo or to a repo that you host your images in, or a registry you host your images in. So they're looking to pull these images into an internal private registry and then reference those for their deployments. And finally, these environments often have sort of differing network configurations. And that means they could have the workstation that they're working from, maybe it has access to both the internet and their internal registry. Maybe it just has access to the internet, and then to get it to the internal registry, they need to, SCP it or sneaker net it somewhere else. And so, and sometimes these are true air gaps, sometimes it's proxy. So there's a bunch of different things that change. And we wanted our solution to really kind of provide, something for all of those environments. Additionally, we have a requirement that we want, software vendors to be able to really package one time, right? So use a single release, right? In this case, you start with Helm, and as Tom mentioned, ideally, you limit the number of top-level charts that you're using. So one is perfect. That's kind of what Tom was talking about. Oftentimes, we'll kind of talk about this as an umbrella pattern, but you leverage chart dependencies and you kind of elevate some of those values into the primary values file. But you want to package with Helm, ideally one chart, and you can then use that same release to do a Helm install, an embedded cluster install, potentially even a COTS install to existing cluster if needed. You want that UI, or a curl install if you're still working with that technology. So again, one release to multiple different install options. And then we believe that you should, be including the replicated SDK. This is going to allow you to get the licensing functionality, automated insights, as well as, custom metrics and other functionality that SDK provides. And, when you're deploying a Helm chart, you're listing the replicated SDK as a dependency, so it's going along with your application. It's kind of bringing some of that functionality in there. And then additionally, we think packaging customized pre-flight checks and support bundles. This is really important for any kind of installation. You should be able to package these once as well. So when you are packaging a Helm chart, it is important that you think about it as, okay, I'm packaging my application, and I need to also include some of these, what we call COTS custom resources or replicated custom resources. These are the items that we'll sometimes refer to as above the line because the way that we show them in Vendor Portal. Basically, these are, the kind application, kind, kind of like COTS config, these items that are really designed to work in embedded cluster or COTS or curl. So these can live outside of the Helm charts. But any other manifest or resources that you want to deploy alongside of your Helm charts and with your Helm installation and for a Helm CLI install, you need to package inside the Helm charts. So oftentimes, maybe you have a config map or secret that lives outside. That won't be installed if your customer just does a Helm install. So if you put it inside of a Helm chart, it will be delivered, but maybe you don't want it to be. So one of the things that we recently introduced was this idea of an annotation that's COTS.io/installers-only. So if you use that annotation on any secret config map that lives outside of your Helm charts, we'll just ignore it when we are evaluating if your release is Helm installable or not. Additionally, we really recommend that you use our custom domains, right? So it's a feature that we added and replicated maybe a year or two ago. It allows you to, specify your, yourdomain.com and then have, subdomains associated with us. So it could be images dot or enterprise dot or a handful of different, custom domains that really white label those URLs that we provide. This is stuff like, instead of using proxy.replicated.com, you can use images.yourdomain.com. We also recommend that you reference these images as the proxy URLs that we're providing to you in your Helm charts. This is a recent change that we made that, we've seen this pattern that, many of our customers wanted to use, was that instead of referencing the upstream kind of original registry that these are proxied from, they want to actually reference the proxy registry because that's what the customers are installing. And so we had to make some changes recently to support this, but it is now fully supported. And so we would love to see you actually referencing in your Helm charts those proxy URLs of those images. And we will be working to make those a bit more obvious in the product as well, so you can put those in. The next part that you have to do is in your kind Helm chart, there's a section called Builder that you'll want to use to identify different Helm chart values that will expand your chart and help us find and discover other images that need to be included with your air gap package or in your image list. If you're using an operator, you would use the additional images section to ensure that you are listing additional images that need to be included in the package as well. So that's kind of how you make sure that you're packaging a release that is truly Helm installable. From there, I'm going to highlight a couple of other kind of smaller fixes that we've made that I think make this experience better. So, when you visit a customer page, you're on the reporting page, you'll now see this little tile for the download portal. And one of the things that we did is we said, we've heard a lot of feedback from customers around managing the password for that customer portal. Before, it was like a 6-character kind of randomly generated string that would change anytime that you clicked it, and it just wasn't great. So now if you click manage customer password, a little pop-up comes up. If you just click cancel, it goes back to whatever it was before, so it doesn't change it. And we aren't able to show you the password because we don't actually store those in the same way, right? So they're all encrypted. But you can type in a new password. So if you're doing some testing, maybe you just make it password. If you're actually giving this to a customer, maybe you generate it or you come up with a password that might be easier for them to access and remember. But you're in control of that. Other thing that you get here, and this is an area where we know there's room for improvement. We plan to add some more details, but you actually can see the last version downloaded listed here in terms of, this customer last downloaded this version on this date at this time. And this is kind of the beginning of us providing some more insight and reporting into like how customers are actually downloading and the progress they're making on air gap installs. Particularly important, I think, when we get into Helm and some of these other installation options. The other feature, we actually just launched this last week, so this is still in beta. But we're adding all of these different install options into the workflow for how you're creating your customers. And as part of that, before we rolled out the install options, GA to every customer, we wanted to make sure that you had some ability to control what the defaults were for those fields when you click create customer. And so this means now, if when you get this feature turned on, for all the built-in license options, you can actually define a default value. So you could say COTS should be enabled for all of our customers or not. Maybe just Helm and embedded cluster enabled for your customers. Every customer should start off as a paid customer with a 365-day expiration, or every customer should start off as a trial customer with a 90-day expiration. But you can define these now so that when you click create customer, you have some consistency and you kind of have a starting point. We like this paired with this new option because we are adding more into the process of creating a customer. And so we wanted to give you a little bit more control as to where each of these starts. So now you can do that. Okay. When it comes to controlling the installation options, right? I think this is one of the most important things that we have launched. And even, a couple of these other pieces were built to support this. But you will now see the available installation types for each customer. So you might decide that one customer can pick any of these 4 plus the 2 air gap options. They have kind of all 6 things available. And there's some other features that kind of cascade and become available or unavailable based on what you select here, because things like auto get ops is really only supported in COTS and curl installs. And some of the other snapshot options are only supported in different types of installation methods. So those are all kind of additional options that show up below this as well. But you can select, okay, I want this customer to only be able to do an existing cluster Helm CLI install, and I'm going to give them the air gap option. Or, this customer can only do an embedded cluster install and there's no air gap option. But you can decide this on a per customer level. And what this does is it controls the experience that your end customer sees in the download portal. So now, if I go to the download portal, the only time I'll see all 4 of these options is if all 4 of these options have been selected. So I can toggle these on and off for any specific customer just by changing what's available here. And we do intend to leverage this even more for something that Amber is going to cover, which is the way that the download portal plans to evolve is to become what we call the enterprise portal, right? So this will have authentication. This will have, deeper installation instructions, update instructions. It'll be more aware of what they've actually already running. It'll have lots of cool functionality. But today, we wanted to get this functionality in early, improve the download portal so that your customers, you can control what experiences they have, and then they can have a really good experience for Helm installations. So now we're kind of getting into the meat of the Helm install. So when you enable the Helm install options on this screen, right, existing cluster with air gap, your customer will see Helm install with these 3 options available: install, manual updates, and automate updates. So we're going to walk through a little bit of each of these. The install, the first thing you're doing is picking the application version that you want to install. Pretty simple, right? So that kind of gets filtered down into the rest of the information. The next thing that you're really doing is giving the customer the opportunity to specify the internal private registry that they intend to pull the images that you've provided from. So they can type in this registry. They don't have to do it. We don't store it anywhere. It's just kind of a nice little way for us to render all the commands below so they can copy, paste, and run these. But we list out all the images. They can run the Docker pool. We list out all the images again with the correct name and tag so that they can run that command, and then they can push it to the registry. So again, it's an optional way that we think kind of streamlines this process. You could have 30 images in here. We're going to show them all, and we're going to help your customer, pull, tag, and push those into the private registry that they're using. From there, the customer is instructed to log in to the registry that we provide for you, right? So this is, again, a whitelisted registry.wp-e.io domain, right? So this is, a replicated endpoint that's been CNAMed by this specific customer. The username is the email address that you've associated with this license. And then we're using an exported variable of the license ID here in this command. So I'm going to log into the registry. I'm going to install the pre-flight plugin into my kubectl. And then I'm going to get the values file, right? So we're using Helm show values from the registry that we host with the version that the customer wants to install. And then we're encouraging the customer generally paired with your documentation, right? So we're not providing all the documentation about your values YAML. We've talked about some different ways that we might be able to help you do that using some standard schema pieces. But in general, your customer, when they're doing this installation, should have their terminal open, they should have the download portal open, and they should have your documentation open so they're able to reference what to change in the values. Obviously, they need to change the image locations. Obviously, they need to change, whatever other values and configurations that you think they should make or that they need to make for their environment. They will then determine how they are actually installing. So again, there are different network configurations here. One is where the workstation can access the internet and the cluster. So I can actually run a Helm install and directly install it on the cluster. The other is where I need to, you can see that in the next piece, I need to actually pull the chart and then, SCP it over to a different location or get it over there, and then I'm going to run that install command somewhere else. So that's sort of the other option to get this in there. I think generally customers should understand this based on what their experiences are, but we're always open to feedback as to what can make this a bit easier. Okay, the next thing is on the manual update side. So what we've done here is pretty simple. It's almost all the steps are very close or identical to the install steps. The main thing we're allowing the customer to do, it's an air gap installation. We don't have visibility into what version they're running. So we ask them to select from the dropdown of the available versions, what version they're running. And then we only show them and make the updates that are currently available to them selectable. And what that means is we're really leveraging what we call this required release. So you can mark a release as something that has to be installed. It can't be skipped. Maybe you have a migration, maybe you have something else that's happening inside of that release, and you want everyone to go, if you're going to go from version 1 to version 10, maybe you have to go through version 5 first, right? So when they pick their version, if they're on version 1, we won't let them select anything above 5. They'll know that they need to hit 5 first. It'll say required, and then they'll actually, be able to get the install instructions for that version. If you don't have any required releases and you can go from 1 to 10, they can just pick 10 and go from there. But this kind of allows us to help partially enforce that required release concept a little bit more. Everything else here is pretty much identical to the install method. There's a couple commands that might be slightly different based on the fact that you already have some values set, but pretty similar. Okay. The final piece of the Helm air gap instructions is really around this idea of automating updates. And so, we added some endpoints here that would allow your end customer to potentially script the process of updating or at least getting these images updated in their own environments. So what that means is, we kind of walk them through. And again, this might not be exactly what they do, but it's a sample. It's written in Bash. It's kind of like, here's how you could do this. There's obviously lots of different ways that they could be, using their own Jenkins or different tooling to make this possible, or just running a script locally, every day, every week, whatever it might be. But we wanted to give an example. So in this case, we're asking them to export the current version and use that to basically query this updates endpoint. So this is another CNAMed endpoint that provides a list of versions that are available based on the current version. Again, so it's leveraging that ability to prevent them from going beyond a required release. We'll give them the required release. If there's one in between the latest and the current. Using a little jQuery in here to pull these pieces out. Obviously, your customer can just use these endpoints, look it up, and decide how they want to do this. And then we're using that to populate the next query, which is hitting that same endpoint for the image list of the version that they're trying to update to. And so you can see they're getting a list of images. And from there, again, they can specify their registry endpoint that they need to push these to, but we're able to use that list of new images and then go through a script to actually tag and push those into that internal registry. So this is an example, again, written in Bash to do all that work. And I don't expect anyone's going to necessarily use this, copy and paste all these pieces and use this exactly. Maybe they will, but generally we're trying to give them a sample that they can follow and do their own kind of automation and scripting. And then finally, this is where it gets a little bit manual. It's hard to actually, leverage the values without manually updating them. Like particularly to update image names, image locations. So they'll probably have to get in there and still make that update, and then do the full Helm upgrade as well. And one of the other kind of interesting, I think, and cool pieces that we did here is we made sure that these endpoints would work really well with, what we consider like common private registries that enterprises might use. And we've tested it and made sure and documented how it works with both JFrog Artifactory and with Harbor. Artifactory, after lots of testing, we realized only supports what we call a pull-through proxy mode. And Harbor actually supports both pull-through proxy mode and image-based replication mirroring from external registries. And so we kind of talk about how each of those work, but your end customer might want to do this in order to scan all the images, move these around, do multi-site replications. There's lots of different reasons that they would want to leverage these. And it just might be part of their process and how they do things, and making sure this works. We implemented catalog endpoints, we implemented a few other things to make sure this would be something that they could successfully do. So in Artifactory, again, you're basically setting up a pull-through proxy. This is in our documentation, but we kind of specify like, what, you're entering the license ID as the password, the email address as the username. You've got, the URL. You want to use your custom domain. And then you're going to, create this remote repository within Artifactory. Within Harbor, you can, again, set this up in a similar way. You can test this connection, should all work as expected. Or you can do, this idea of actually mirroring the images into your own registry and pre-pulling them instead of just, proxying them. So and Chuck is going to do a demo, a live demo of a lot of this functionality. So you'll see him in Harbor. You'll see him, kind of on the download page, and you're going to really see him doing that. He's doing that next. But I wanted to give an overview of all this functionality we've added because we really believe supporting these types of Helm air gap installations is just a critical part of what we think the future of sort of self-hosted software is.